experience, the astral plane, and Vincent van Gogh. Uh, I had no interest originally in OBE or astral plane, any of that. The last time I even thought about the astral plane was back in the day, 70s in San Francisco, Timothy Leary. But I did some painting. I took the time to learn how to do rudimentary landscape painting in plein air. And after a time, I wanted to look at the history of painting to see where my painting would belong, what kind of painting it is. And so I started looking. I set up a set of criteria that I was going to exclude everything except what I thought I was interested in finding out, which is the fundamental of presentation of the picture. And so I took this aesthetic and I started looking through the histories. And eventually I came to Raphael, who brought colors, a new kind of colors to the canvas, and he couched it in classical painting, which is a problem because a lot of colors involve, and the use of colors involve a part of the imaging of the picture that belongs to the subconscious. The subconscious not only dreams for us, it also helps to generate pictures in ordinary conscious experience, meaning what you see. There's some elements that have to be, what you have is a couple of round eyeballs, and they're electronically hooked up to a black box, which is the brain. And so they take elements of what you see, the visual input, which goes into the eye, and then these photons hit the little retinas, receptors in the retina, and then the brain has to construct the picture that you see out of that. You don't directly see what you see. The conscious mind has to, and the subconscious have to construct that picture out of what the sensors in your eyes are, how they're activated. And the best example of this is if you've got a flat canvas or a flat surface, there's nowhere in the brain that the lens in your eye can focus a flat surface onto a flat surface. That flat surface has to be constructed out of a curvilinear set of elements in the black box. And the painters have dealt with this since they first started painting. And what surprised me and what got me intrigued was that they're aware of this and they take it into account in various ways when they're painting their picture. I had no idea that sort of thing happened. And when I first looked at the histories and looked at Van Gogh, I thought, well, this guy can't paint. But it turns out, after taking a couple more runs and finessing my aesthetic, I found out that he could. But there's a secret to understanding him, which he gives in his paintings, and that's where I want to start here. Okay. And this is an illustration that I made on a blackboard. That's all I got to use here, these little whiteboards, to give an illustration, a visual cue to what I'm talking about as I explain what happened. Okay, this is a dream state presentation. It's the only repetitive dream that I had when I was a kid. I had it about 3 times over a space of about 2 years when I was about 7 or 8. And I understood what it meant. All it is a fence line, a couple of trees on a fence line at the back of a pasture with the woods behind them. And I understood it intuitively that the subconscious was telling me that it was looking at the same thing I'm looking at, and trying to find what it was I was looking for. I never did, but he was reminding me that he was watching too, but he wasn't looking through my eyes. He was watching on his own, so he was keeping a watch. And the lesson would be that I needed to do some serious looking too. But the thing of it is, this is a template, what should we call an archetypal visual format for the subconscious. And Van Gogh runs it in his picture, The Painter on the Way to Work, that was lost in 1945. And I call it my Vogue picture because Vogue magazine used it as their cover back in the early 2000s, and that was my first introduction to it. But it's a really important picture because of what it is. Now, in his picture, he's got a pebble road across here, and he's walking along it, and he's got a shadow. The sun is throwing the shadow right opposite him on the road, so they're sort of walking together. And all of this here was just the sides of a wheat field and a couple of trees just like this, and that was it. So Van Gogh is saying that he's doing his painting from the perspective of the subconscious, not from the conscious visual perception, from the visual perception of the subconscious, because he's in the subconscious. This is the subconscious, and everything on the other side of the trees is the ordinary, physical world, the conscious state. So all this time I thought he couldn't paint. He doesn't paint weird looking pictures because that's the best he can do. He paints weird looking pictures because looking at visual experience from the subconscious is a weird result. It gives weird results because the subconscious does not have the same, especially memory, but perception that you're consciously aware of. Okay, and that also says some strange things maybe about what his visualization is, if it's not an example of Carl Jung's active imagination. But anyway, so I had devised to look at Raphael. Raphael was my problem I was trying to solve, to find out what to do with those colors. And he just sticks me into the classical format of painting, as a part of the classical aesthetic. But that's not, strictly speaking, legal, because the colors that he puts up are, what do they call them, translucent, iridescent, words like that, which those colors do not appear in that way in the conscious world, in the normal viewing. They're typical of the colors that the subconscious uses to, for example, build dreams with. But it drove me a little bit mad. I got obsessed with it, what to do with those. And so I thought I would find a mental technique that I could analyze it with. And I came up with the only solution I could see is just to visualize colors. that means in the space around you, you project a color, and you're going to see it as you would say a dream or something. And you can practice that, and you get really good at it. But it just starts like this, just putting up. I hope you can see this better than I think you can. Just putting up colors, just to see if that sort of thing could be done. If I can visualize the colors and stack them. That's one of the problems in Raphael, some of Raphael's pictures, is he'll put colors on the canvas side by side, but there'll be one of them that wants to come forward, and the other one will recede. And the problem with that is that it builds a space between them, and that space does not belong to the linear perspective that the entire canvas presents. So you have an anomalous amount of space in there, and what the hell is that? And the question is, if you can build all of your three spaces, all of your three dimensions in that way, arranging your colors like that, then what kind of space would you have? So it's a problem. You can't make any sense out of it. You can't make it work. Okay, the next thing I did was I figured I could put just different blocks of color up and move them around and maybe build spaces or something with them. And that's just a kaleidoscope. And that's where my problem changed, because I did this overall 6 or 8 months without getting any result, but I was that obsessed with Raphael to understand where he was going, what he was doing. And lo and behold, I started dreaming them. And the subconscious got very definitive and pronounced in following what I was doing by putting up these massive kaleidoscope of these blocks of color. And then my problem changes, because I'm not doing a program about colors, learning about colors. I'm doing a program about the subconscious, because here it is, just out of the blue and for absolutely no reason that I can think of, it starts doing, and in fact, influencing me when I did it in the waking state, contributing to that too. And it started doing some really weird stuff in sleep, all sorts of questions were coming up. We have 2 eyeballs, okay, but they're not together. So if each one of them is inside a circle, say, or a sphere, and that's just circle vision or sphere vision, when you put them together, they're not going to coincide. There's going to be one side of the right eye is going to be sticking out here, and the left eye is going to be sticking out here. And what it would do in the dream state is it would combine these. Okay, the idea is showing some of the mechanisms by which the mind combines what it sees from 2 different eyeballs. And what he showed was that he could force one inside the other, and there would be a thickness between the two. These are spheroids, and so you have a little shell, but it has a finite width because of the 2 eyes being in 2 different physical places. And so he would run that, showing what he could do to combine the thought processes that it can use in various ways, which didn't have a lot of meaningful information for me, but it was interesting to watch. Okay, so the SEs kind of took over. At about that time, I was reading biographies of Van Gogh to try to find out something about him. I wanted to understand what he knew, if I could figure out what he was doing. And I ran across one of his biographies. He talked about he had played a piano or an organ, and found an organ in a church or somewhere, and he had a note on it, and he said it represented a specific color to him. So that's definitive for him from the way that he works, that that color is going to, a musical note usually belongs to a song or melody, and that means that if a note has a certain color, then the larger melody will have a structure that is visionable, or it can be represented by the same way I'm using these other colors, and so I started doing that. And that is the method. That's all of it. That's all there is to it. You start with the idea maybe that you want to do a light show for the music that you listen to. You want to visualize it in colors and as much of the melody as you can, so that you do see it. It's not, you're just going to imagine that you're imagining it, and that's it, because that's not anything at all. You have to project the thing up in colors, and it has to be a valid structure for the music. You have to be able to hear it. Colors are run as the notes run through the scales. You got melodies and then counterpoints and all that, the way the whole thing builds. All that plays in a space, and it can be just a little thing you're just looking at. Or what happened to me was, one night I was sitting down at my computer. There's me in my little room. I hope you can see that. Does that show? I guess so. I hope it does. Oh yeah, I see it does. And the subconscious has got really good at dreaming. A lot of structured dreams, but they're very clear, and they can take a situation that's happening in my ordinary life and just build a humongous structure and story out of it. But and occasionally it'll pop things in my head during the waking hours, and not just at night. One time it did this, I was sitting in my room making this little music, and I was going to go up on the way up. And the subconscious told me that when I punched that button, the enter button, to go up on bring that page up, that all hell was going to break loose. It just came right out. Sorry, come right out of the blue sky. And sure enough, when I punched the button, it was like an explosion. And, I turned around and looked, and it was just huge. It was just like it went on forever and ever, maybe the size of the solar system or something like that. It was big. And I was still driving it. I wasn't, I was listening to my CD, and I had Dire Straits on, and that was the music I was using to drive it. And it didn't take any more energy for me to play it up that big, but it was huge, and that changed everything. Because when you can do that, there's all kinds of things you can do. You can use the music to build geometries. This is an example of one. A spherical shape is a good shape to use generally, because it's got all different directions, so where your music is going in different directions. Or it can be like clockwork. The whole thing could just be one great clockwork of the notes as they come and go. But you can project them out, and you can write them. So your perspective, instead of being on the ground looking up, you could be out in the space, well, la la land, riding one of the machines. Another thing's a lot of fun. You can use the dynamics of music. This is supposed to be what I like to do with ice skating, skiing, ice skating, anything like that. And Calling Elvis is what I like to use this song. But the music comes down, and the percussion, the force of the percussion is what drives the forward motion. It's just like it blows at your feet, just scoot right across the ice. And of course the geometry comes out of it, all kinds of geometry you can build from the music. And stuff like that gets very fast. There's one thing about it, rock and roll is good for this because they have the riffs and the very fast pieces, and that's what the subconscious dearly loves because it runs on, it has a faster clock than the ordinary conscious state. It's much faster. So usually when you're doing music, and usually the subconscious is doing it, it just becomes natural where he does his part and I do my part, and he handles the fast stuff. I'll leave that to him, and that's just the way it works. I can't say why anybody would want to do something like this. What's the point? I got no idea. I couldn't believe that all that could even happen. Okay. But I played with that for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. And then I gradually, I'm making a mess here. I gradually got to where I didn't do it so much and more or less forgot about it. And then a year ago, in February of 22, I ran into all this stuff on YouTube about Carl Jung, the FBI, and these guys doing videos for astral and for lucid dreaming. And I got to a point, I looked around a little bit and I found one. I thought I'd just give it a shot, just see if there's anything to it or not. I mean, space cadets, back from the old days. What do you think? Who knows? And I had the experience of a lifetime because I went flying. Sure as the world. And that is almost out of the picture. Well, this ain't a high quality video, if you haven't noticed. So I'm flying around out there, and they got these circles like champagne bubbles. I don't know if you can see any. Maybe that's a little better. Okay. So I was flying like that. My skin, I didn't have a physical body, or I did, but it was like a plastic doll or something. It was, all it was my skin was a sheath of brilliant white light. And, now it had the same form that I have, and I was just floating with it. And these bubbles would come by, and they would go through me. And of course, they also say it's supposed to put you to sleep and make you dream, and that's what happened. I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes of this, I started to go to sleep, and I went through 2 levels of dreams, and it was the subconscious was trying to explain these bubbles. In the first one, it was just standing there explaining how They're not perfectly clear, but they have a sheen of white light that is covering part of them. And then the second level, he was still lecturing. He goes on like he thinks he acts like he believes he can speak English, and so he go to talking. He just talk, and it doesn't make any sense at all. But it was also about the bubbles, and he had a 2-foot piece of wood, a furring strip, with finishing nails, small finishing nails in it, and he would just pluck those nails out, and they make a pop, pop, pop sound. And he was likening that to the sound of the bubbles in the video when they pop. And this is really interesting to me because in Van Gogh's picture, the one that he paints, both he and his shadow have wooden sticks. Maybe they look like walking sticks, but they might have used them also for malls when they got to where they were going to paint. And they were pointing down at the pebbles in the road. So and you look at Van Gogh, and he looks just nothing happy. He is just, I don't know, frustrated, or maybe the sun's too hot. But I think that he was going on about those pebbles, because I had come across in Cézanne and in the sort of dialogue between Monet and Cézanne, that Cézanne realized that spherical shapes cannot be masked into a construct. And it just can't be done. Now, mostly what he does is he fits his canvas to the flat surface. He fits the shell of his painted picture, fits over the canvas like a glove, and that means when you're looking at it and your mind is processing these little photons, the picture doesn't go through the processing. It doesn't have to be processed because he processes it as he paints it. And you just have a flat surface in the outside world that goes smack into the visual, if you want to say, like a vision to it, in a ethereal state, in a dream state, where that's how the eye actually focuses it, and the mind. Now, it doesn't go through any of the processing. It just zaps right to the focal point with no processing having to be done on it. And I was listening to a lady talk about how Cézanne's paintings, that nothing floats in them, but his apples do float in several of his pictures, and the reason they float is for the same reason that Van Gogh had a problem with those pebbles, because they can't be structured. They can't build a structure, they can't be reduced to a structure. And he does do something about that in his cafe at, Cafe at Night, where he takes the pebbles and he concretes them into a surface as cobblestones. And that lays the ground. See, the whole point to them in the picture, like I showed you, painter on his way to work, is that he's painting from the perspective of the subconscious, not from the conscious. So when these pebbles are laid out as cobblestones, they allow for him to advance into the distance, like the cafe is. And the cafe is all flat linear structures. That's the conscious state part of it. And of course, by doing that, he escapes into the night eventually. And then you have his starry night scenes, which I ain't going to go on about here, except to say that the starry night over the Rhone River, is it? You see a sort of a hybridized perspective where the ground level, looking flat on, it has a depth of a couple of kilometers, maybe at the most. Whereas the way he paints the stars, of course, as people have noticed, is that there's no deep space in it, because the background of the space deep space would normally be there, is woven brush marks like a basket. So it delineates the back side of a cube. And there's nothing behind the cube, that back side of the cube in the picture. And so that means that the perspective for the depth to the back in the starless pictures has to be probably thousands of light years for all those stars to be inside a cube. There are none of them that are like way off in the distance. Okay, so he's showing a perspective that's very much like where you're seeing in this world dimensions, and then you're also seeing the transcendental dimensions of the space with the stars in it. Anyway, so and all that's related back to the pebbles in that road. And the problem he had with that is the same problems, that I had back a year ago in February with those little spheres. So we're doing the same thing. Van Gogh, this is the kind of thing that Van Gogh was doing. And he knew it, and because I was trying to understand him, I go through these changes. Okay, now after the night that I did the astral thing, the SE subconscious waited about 2 weeks. Every time we do this kind of experiment or anything new, he'll do an assessment of it. And normally it's the next night, 2 nights at the most. And he waited 2 weeks. I had to wait 2 weeks for him to do an assessment on just what the hell happened there. And not only that, 2 months later, he flipped down and started showing presentations from my chest. It's like he was in the back of the head. It's always like it's been projected from the back of the head. And this is kind of space that Van Gogh is in. I call it ethereal, electromagnetic space. Not really sure what it is or if it's fully there, but it's the appearance of things. And Van Gogh is showing that actually in both his Starry Night pictures. He's projecting the idea that he's projecting to the stars. And then about 2 months, after 2 months, it started centering in my chest and doing the projections, all of his projections. We're talking about the same thing, doing music. And he's expanding into a different space. It's really like a different universe. And he's there right now. He's there anytime I look for him. Any time of day, he's there. And that's where he's looking from and projecting some. He can go up and do it the old way, but he doesn't like to do it because he doesn't want to get the 2 spaces confused in the work that he's doing. It's not a good idea. This space here is, I consider everything that's in the subconscious, the Jungian entities and just everything is in that space. It's nothing like a three-dimensional space. It doesn't have three dimensions. It's many more. You don't, with space, if you got three dimensions, you got 3 degrees of freedom. And that's all the degrees of freedom you have. If you want to go somewhere, it's going to be alone. You're going to have a choice between X, Y, and Z coordinates. That's not true there. I don't know how many dimensions it has, depending on what you're doing. And how they act depends on what you're doing. And that's where, when I do this thing now, I'm doing it in that space, and he's doing it from down here in my chest. He doesn't want, every now and then I make a point to do something in the old space. And I'm hoping to learn something. Oh, the astral plane is up in that space. That's why he uses it. But he had to change his position, you know, and get out of the old space. Van Gogh has the appearance of flying. If you're flying in these machines, but you're not really flying. It's just that what Van Gogh was asking is, how big is the dream space? You know, if you wanted to make it big as it could be, how big would it be? And it's what he paints. Something about the size of it and the nature of reality there in his starry night pictures. Anyway, so he does this about 2 months later, and that's been almost a year now, and he's still at it. And every now and then, you know, we'll do an old-timey exercise, but in the new space. Don't have a whole lot of time to do it, and to me, it's just, all of this is just something that happens, that your mind does it naturally. It grows like a flower. And like I said, I don't know why anybody would choose to do it, except it's naturally what it does anyway. It grows as you grow, and you shouldn't die with the same brain that you had, that you're born with. And you probably really don't. People don't realize, they don't pay enough attention, maybe to realize what's going on. Anyway, that was it, and that's my information. Thanks.